Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.
Making It Personal with Bishop William Johnson on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. I'm Jean Till, and our guest today is Dr. Charles Camosy, professor of medical humanities at the Creighton University School of Medicine.
And this show appearing right on the cusp of Christmas.
Yes.
Here, just days away. So our young people are keyed up, and I'm sure parents are trying to keep the temperature reasonable in the house. But it's always a grace for me and for our vocations team, Father Ross Parker, Father Reed Flood, Father Max Carson. We always have this vocation discernment retreat. And it's kind of like an island of peace right before at the Jesuit Retreat Center, Creighton Retreat Center in Griswold, Iowa. And so men, seniors in high school on up. This year, we're going to have 16 men joining us, so I think the Spirit is working, and we talk about discernment, we talk about various things, pertaining to priesthood, and then we just hang out together, and there's a little fraternity, but there's a lot of peace at that privileged site. So if people will pray for us today, and that the hearts of these men might be open to what the Spirit might be saying to them. We know that lots of saints these days, that we've celebrated. A little obscure one who kind of gets tucked in right before Christmas that I have a great devotion to, St. John of Conti, on Monday, the 23rd. And so my years in Krakow and the seminar in the summers, always spending some time at St. Anne Church before his tomb. His teacher, professor, one who got ostracized by some of his colleagues, was a parish priest. They're like, oh no, they visited a professor on us. What's that going to do? But endeared himself, and his simplicity of life, his dedication to the poor and to the truth. St. John of Conti, pray for us in this way. So we're grateful to have Professor Charles Camosy with us. His pedigree is impressive. We know he appears on shows with Cardinal Dolan and many others as well. But so thank you for taking time with us this morning, especially as the semester winds down, Professor Camosy. Yes. Again, anyone who Googles you or in any way, sees your name appearing in all sorts of wide-ranging publications and various media, Diocesan Blogs, America, to the Pillar. So, you just can't kind of typecast you or put you in a certain slot. You seem to kind of transcend some of those differences that people who impose a kind of narrative lens as well. So, is this, for you something that's unfolded and kind of a vocational to bring the great riches of the Catholic faith, our understanding of human bear, at a more popular level?
Yeah, you know something about this now because you have to preach and teach to so many different levels and different kinds of people with different backgrounds. I find it exhilarating in one sense to be able to do academic work and also a lot of public work, but it's also really difficult because, to do academic work well, as you know, you have to really dig deep, and you sometimes have to use 50-cent words instead of the dime word, and you have to publish in journals that very few people read. And in order to reach a broader range of people, though, you sometimes have to sacrifice some of that rigor. You have to speak in ways that are more accessible and certainly not as in depth. So I sometimes try to keep it in the middle, but you can, as some of my colleagues remind me, sometimes you can miss everyone, right? You can miss the academics who say, oh, this guy is a popularizer, and then you miss the public people saying, oh, this guy speaks, with words I don't understand or with a background that I don't have. And so it's kind of a tricky row to hoe to make that happen. But I'm trying anyway. I'm trying, Bishop.
And your 4 children help you in this? They kind of give you, Dad, what are you saying, in this way? But
they could not be less interested. And my children could not be less interested. I show them, hey, look at, recently we put the 8 books I've written on our mantle, and those are Daddy's boring books, right? Let's
no prophet is without honor, except
right.
in his native place.
Yeah.
So, but no, I think in the vital role you're fulfilling, in the public square for the church, grateful for that as well. Looking forward to going into some of these issues as we turn the break.
We are going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll visit with Dr. Charles Camosy. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. And on today's show, we are visiting with Dr. Charles Camosy, Professor of Medical Humanities at the Creighton University of Medicine.
Okay, thank you again. And so you did visit Des Moines a couple of years ago, appearing with Mercy College of Health Sciences, Center for Human Flourishing, and spent time with us. Your big picture take on how the Catholic Church may help save the American healthcare system. We know that medicine becomes more and more specialized, and then the role of nurses, those essential workers that we know are in such short supply in this way. But how this vocation of nursing then maybe you say is distinct from that of primary care physicians, and that the voice of nurses needs to be amplified in our own medical culture.
One of the things, Bishop, I've been so gratified and frankly surprised to hear over the last year or so is this focus, for lack of a better way of saying it, on the right or more traditional, political actors or even traditional Catholics, focus on something called MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things that I've seen come out of that movement is precisely this idea that, gosh, it really seems like our healthcare system is not serving at all the human person in the fullness of who they are, the whole person. And that's, of course, at the heart of a Catholic vision of the human person. I think you're so lucky to have Bud and Bo at the
Mercy College,
doing such good work with mission there to drive home this Catholic vision of the whole person. We're not, component parts that have specialists that sort of make money. I have people live today because of those specialty that academic and medical expertise, but we're missing something very important, aren't we, about just serving the whole person, the fullness of who they are, and how all these things interact, including mental health, including spiritual health. And I don't know, my sense very clearly is that nurses and the vocation of nursing is much better at serving the whole person, at thinking about the person and their component parts, and not just as individuals, but in relationships with families, in relationships with their communities. Nurses sort of know what's going on in ways that even the primary care physician doesn't know, or the attending physician doesn't know, to say nothing of the specialists who, again, tend to think of, addressing the component parts here. So I made the argument in multiple contexts that nursing is a really important counterweight to sort of doctoring, and doctoring's attempt to split the person into their component parts and not care for the whole person.
Wow, wonderful. And, the nurses that we are privileged to know, attended to that nexus of relationships with families, the dynamics that are, all over the map and kind of bringing us into that sense that there's grace to be found, but we can't just presume it at the same time. Also, in light of care for the whole person, as we move more toward looking at the end-of-life issues, the whole way in which, now in the United Kingdom, another domino falling in line of countries legalizing physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. We know it's present here in some of our western states and other places, getting more strident. Your nursing bioethics text kind of speaks about this and the need for palliative and end-of-life care. And you have personal experience with this in working with your students and others.
Yeah, so before my current role at the Creighton School of Medicine, and also I teach basically 20% of my time at the seminary in New York. I taught at Fordham University, Jesuit University in New York City, for 14 years, and taught bioethics there. And I had this really cool service learning course in bioethics where there were 3 different places where they could do service learning. And one of them was Calvary Hospice Hospital in the Bronx, one of the leading hospice providers in the country, and actually one of the main innovators of hospice in the United States, going back decades. And one of the things that I learned from that experience, and I just finished writing about this in a new book I'll have coming out next fall, on how a Catholic understanding of a good death can resist physician-assisted suicide.
I'll be interested in it, even if your kids won't. I really will, that new book. Okay.
Well, that makes 5 people that'll be interested. That's good. But this guy would tell my students and me when we'd visit, we have no one here, and they had some very difficult cases. They have no one here who requests anything like hastening death. And it's because, first of all, they provide first-rate palliative care. They treat the pain. They kill the pain, not the patient. And they make every patient, every resident feel welcome. They treat the whole person. They touch the person. They pray with the person. They make sure that the person is integrated in the communities in the community that they have there, which they've worked very hard to build up over decades. And so it's just a perfect example. Now, not everyone has access to these kind of hospice centers. In fact, quite the opposite. There are quite a few really bad ones, if we're honest about that. Mm-hmm. But here's another place where a Catholic, this is an explicitly Catholic group, where a Catholic understanding of care for the whole person, even in what you might think is a specialty case, palliative care at the end of life, when you treat the whole person, you care for the whole person, the amount of good that's done, the amount of flourishing that happens, even in a very difficult situation, can be profound.
Did it, within that, and using the full armamentarium the medicine offers, did it diminish the need for psychiatric interventions in cases of depression and others? Were those moderated?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, one of the reasons why there's such problems with mental health towards the end of life is because whatever opposite of care for the whole person is, that's often what we offer, right? We sort of push, especially our elderly and disabled, into isolated situations where there's virtually no one to interact with, and in fact, the disaster that we have here with this is so profound that sometimes the New York Times did an expose on this. Sometimes they actually give people in these situations antipsychotic drugs when they don't need antipsychotic drugs, and the reason is because they don't have enough staffing to care for them, and this keeps patients docile so they don't sort of wander out of the facility, which has happened, unfortunately, in certain circumstances. And so can you imagine, not only isolated, but given antipsychotic drugs that actually double the chance of one's death, and basically have a chemical straitjacket until one dies? Whatever the opposite of whole care person that is at the heart of a Catholic vision is, that's exactly what we're offering so many people, unfortunately. But when we give our version of this, the kinds of interventions that you were just talking about aren't even necessary because the flourishing of the whole person is just present.
Oh, wonderful. And I understand the temptation. Some of our elderly priests, dementia or other things, and as they decline, wandering off. And how do we, without restraining them, how do we keep them
right
on the reservation?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a difficult thing. So how those students that were in your service learning course must have been impressed, and hopefully now become apostles of this holistic view of the human person that we have as well. You may or may not know, Bishop Massa, rector at St. Joseph Dunwoody, has invited me to be, who's the new incoming chair of the Doctrine Committee for the U.S. Bishops, has invited me to take part in that. But a project that's been underway already, the revision of the ethical and religious directives, that'll probably come before the bishops next November. But palliative care is one of the topics I think that's addressed, as well as gender discordance. Do you think that is that going to be something that is kind of abstruse for clinicians, or do you think it will actually inform and irrigate and move the needle on the culture of life, at least within the Catholic orbit?
Oh, I think it's absolutely essential. One of the things we've seen in the recent debate in the United Kingdom, which some of your listeners may know about assisted suicide. I like to call it assisted killing because it really drives home what's happening. Mm-hmm. Especially since in many cases people are not dying, or the reason they're being killed has nothing to do with the fact that they're dying. It's some other judgment being made. But they're having this very serious debate over there, and it's one that we've had at the state level in many states in the United States too, is, well, how much of this is about the inability of people to get the kind of care that the people got at Calvary Hospice Center that we were just talking about, right? Not everyone has access to that. And so if one does not have access to good palliative care, do you need something like physician-assisted suicide to make sure people don't suffer? But the answer to that, of course, is not to kill people or to fundamentally change the very nature of medicine to include killing, which I don't know how healthcare could possibly include killing and remain any coherent concept at all. Let's not ditch our very notion of healthcare to do this. Let's get better palliative care. Let's focus on palliative care, making it the kind of thing that the Calvary offers to everyone, like as a fundamental basic human right. And so the least we can do then as a church, which is not the least at all, when 1 in 7 beds in the United States is in a Catholic institution, it would be absolutely huge if through the ethical and religious directives we did a much better job as Catholic institutions providing this to people. it wouldn't be a sideline thing at all. It would be a very, very, very important thing.
Yeah, and probably on an economic basis would also be good stewardship of resources instead of pouring all these kind of dramatic interventions in the latter phases, truly caring for the person in this way. A topic that's, over the decades continued to be engaged, and then most recently, maybe it slipped by, but the Pontifical Academy for Life released this summer another gift, a surprise, the Little Lexicon on the End of Life. And having spent some time thinking about the issue of assisted nutrition and hydration, while that under Pope John Paul II was regarded more in the line of ordinary care rather than medical treatment. Do you see some shifting of the sand in that regard?
Yeah, Bishop, thanks for asking about this. It's frankly a difficult topic for me because sort of growing up, as it were, as a young theologian and bioethicist, I always wanted, it would be sort of a dream for me to be on the Pontifical Academy for Life, contribute to a faithful engagement with bioethics in these contexts. Unfortunately, I think if I'm just speaking frankly with you, there's been some slippage with the Academy in recent years, and this would be an example of one of those. I think it's very important for us to, especially when we're talking about care for the disabled, those who find it difficult or impossible to speak up for themselves and need others to speak for them, to allow a slippage to say that giving them food and water is somehow medical care, or medical treatment rather, a kind of technical thing. That's the way that the Little Lexicon seems to talk about it, as a sort of technical matter. But it's actually very simple. It's like literally a tube, right? And you put stuff into the tube, and then it goes into the stomach. There's very little technical about it at all. And in fact, a lot of other things that we do that would be considered care are much more technical in nature than offering that kind of tube. And so we need to be extremely careful about this, not only for that reason, but because the denial of food and water is often not let's be clear about one other thing, and this is something that the Church has spoken about very clearly, too, for decades now. There are times where giving someone food or water is not indicated because maybe there's stomach cancer or the body literally can't process the food or something or water or something like that. That's a totally different story.
It introduces a great burden. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it introduces a great burden. But let's also be honest about something else. Those are very often not the reasons that food and water is denied. For instance, in the very famous case of Terri Schiavo in the early aughts, the reason she was denied food and water is because her husband wanted her to die, right? That it was aiming at death by omission. It was time for Terri Schiavo and others in a so-called vegetative state to die. And so food and water is withheld not because it's burdensome, not because it can't provide a benefit, but because we've decided the individual should die now. So it's euthanasia by omission. The definition of euthanasia in the Catholic context is an act or an omission which of itself or by intention causes death. And so when one omits something so that other people die, that's euthanasia. That's aiming at death. And that's what's often going on in a refusal to offer nutrition and hydration.
Thank you for that crisp definition and distinction there. I think we could probably go on for an hour-long podcast here. This is also to be contrasted with what is a very natural phenomenon. My years as a chaplain in care facilities and finding that a very privileged ministry, where quite naturally, and even with my late priest uncle who died in September, their appetite wanes. They cease to take in food. They're not aiming to die. They're not suicidal. They're just nature is taking its course, and we can embrace that as a good faith phenomenon that's occurring. Is that not true?
That's absolutely the case. Yeah, and it's good to pay attention to the rhythms of the body and the rhythms of life and the rhythms of death. And anybody that's been around people who are dying know that's the case. But Bishop, it's just very easy to slip from that into saying, well, I've made the decision it's time for this individual to die now, so I'm going to stop feeding them, right? That's quite a different scenario. And unfortunately, that's one of the reasons why some hospices are distrusted by people. I mean, there are good hospices like Calvary. There are really bad hospices. And one of the things I've found interesting over the years is learning how much vulnerable communities know this more than those who are privileged.
Amen.
A lot of privileged communities really get access to good hospice care. A lot of communities of color, a lot of more vulnerable communities don't, and they really distrust it, and for good reason.
Yeah, so justice issues. So I want to remain on good terms with my masters here, and so, Jean, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Stay with us as we finalize our conversation with Dr. Charles Camosy, Professor of Medical Humanities at the Creighton University School of Medicine. If you want to read his articles or his books, a plethora of information, simply Google his name, Charles Camosy, Camosy. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson.
Professor Camosy, Charles, if we could swing a little bit to something completely different, as they used to say.
Sure.
You'd mentioned New York, your post, endowed professorship in moral theology at St. Joseph Seminary in Dunwoody, where now we have 3 seminarians from the Diocese of Des Moines, and they're doing very well. So you'd written a piece, How Catholic Seminaries and Schools Can Help Each Other Out of Crisis, and you talk about internal transformation in the seminary, but also on the interface of seminaries. We don't have a major seminary in the Diocese of Des Moines, but we obviously avail ourselves of them, and so that's something that impacts the American scene in a very vivid way. Could you just share some of your proposals?
Yeah, well, first, I'm just so glad to see so many guys being formed spiritually, and also with regard to so their spiritual and mental health is just taken extremely seriously at the seminary, and that comes from a care for the whole person approach, I think, that we talked about earlier, that is just so deeply Catholic. And thank God we're turning towards our seminary formation. It's just so good. The guys are just so healthy and masculine and thoughtful and just embracing the fullness of who they are as the human beings that they are, and that's just really good.
Is it Colonel Dolan or someone says, we're looking for normal. We're looking for normal here.
Yeah, it's totally the way that it is. And I feel so lucky to be there. In fact, I joke with them. I say I feel freer actually to teach what I want to at the seminary than I did when I was at Fordham. So I'm very, really happy to be able to do that.
I'm not surprised, but anyway.
I guess my main sort of big idea, and it might be sort of too egg-headed in the clouds academic idea, I don't know, but is there seems to be so much ferment in Catholic education now, creative ideas almost everywhere you turn, including the sort of focus on homeschool, pods, classical education, those sorts of things. But there don't seem to be, there are some resources out there, good resources out there, but we need so many more. I think I've heard many people say we need almost like a teacher's college, as it were, for this movement. And I'm looking around at the colleges and universities that are available to do this, and some are good and some are doing this. But I wonder if this is something that seminaries could sort of take the lead on. Could we create sort of adjacent programs to help serve these growing and very, very creative opportunities with something like a teacher's college to train teachers, administrators, come for summers, come virtually, come online, come for breaks or whatever it would look like. I don't know exactly what it would look like, but that's sort of the big idea I've been trying to explore.
Okay, yeah. And for our Spirit Catholic Radio listeners, St. Gregory the Great Seminary in the Diocese of Lincoln, how might they, even with basically an undergraduate seminary program in that way. And, these are things that maybe generationally were present a little bit. An institution I used to serve, Loras College in Dubuque, was an affiliate of the Catholic University of America, and some are training others, but it's like you say, for the lay people to be trained. How about looking outward then, that interface ever more, the ways in which even parishes could be impacted by this? This is something that's come up in the Higher Education Working Group of the U.S. bishops, of which I've been a member. Diocesan staff even. How can those resources be there? Or maybe I'm just reiterating the previous question.
No, I think that's right. I think we need seminaries, as you're no doubt familiar with, used to be much more full, and so they're very large buildings, and they're built for a lot more people being in them. I just think every time I walk the halls of St. Joseph Seminary in Dunwoody, I think, oh my gosh, what sort of things could we do with these facilities? And I think training not only along the lines I suggested, but along the lines you just suggested. Right there. And I think, and let's just be honest about this too, a lot of the ostensibly Catholic colleges and universities that used to exist no longer exist as Catholic colleges and universities. They become other things. And as a result, they find themselves waning in their influence and in their enrollment, and many are frankly dying.
In about 15 seconds, Professor.
I think maybe we need a shift in how we think about where are the centers of being able to do something like this.
Yeah, and that tension even in the theological realm, between a more preserving the tradition and the kind of constructive way. So blessings on you and all your work, your vocation and ministry to serve the gospel in the church. May you get some time with your family to savor these precious sacred days ahead. Thank you very much, Professor.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Bishop. Anytime.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. Thanks to our guest and all of our listeners in Iowa, Nebraska, or Wisconsin, or wherever you may be listening on the Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Johnson every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.